Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we are shifting gears. We usually spend our time dismantling, tech conglomerates or analyzing historical trends, but today we are heading into the kitchen.
We are.
But I want to be clear right off the bat. We aren't just reading a recipe card. We are unpacking a masterclass in texture engineering and flavor balance. And it comes from a very specific, and I think often misunderstood, corner of the culinary world. We are talking about Zambian Kapenta.
It's a fascinating topic, and I think for a lot of people, especially in the West, when they hear dried fish, they immediately put it in a box. They think of it as purely functional. It's preserved food, it's survival food. But what we're looking at today, specifically based on this really deep guide from In Food Specials, is how you take a preserved, shelf-stable ingredient and engineer it into something that is, frankly, gourmet.
Exactly. The source video, it's titled Zambian Kapenta Recipe.
Yeah.
And the host, she makes a pretty bold claim right at the start. She says this dish is made with minimal ingredients, but the outcome is, quote, just so delicious. And that's really our mission today.
Right.
We want to decode that paradox. How do you get massive flavor payoff and complex texture from just a handful of pantry staples?
And that is usually where the real culinary magic happens. It isn't about having 50 rare ingredients. It is about understanding the chemistry of the 3 or 4 you do have.
Yeah.
In this case, it's really a lesson in physics and hydration specifically, how you treat delicate proteins that have been sun-dried.
So let's set the scene. We are dealing with Kapenta. If you aren't familiar with it, or maybe you know it by another name, the source explicitly mentions that, yes, this is also known as dagaa.
Right.
What are we actually looking at physically?
Physically, we're talking about a very small fish. Think anchovy-sized freshwater fish. And the crucial detail here, the one that dictates every single step of this recipe, is that it is sun-dried.
Right, and that's a key distinction. We aren't talking about a fresh fillet that you just pulled out of the fridge.
No, not at all. This has been dehydrated. The moisture has been removed to preserve it. And that process, it changes the cellular structure of the meat entirely. It concentrates the flavor, making it very savory and briny, but it also makes the texture incredibly vulnerable. It's brittle when dry, but it's just desperate to absorb water.
Okay, let's unpack that vulnerability, because the first step in this process is the prep work. You don't just throw this fish into a pan directly from the bag.
Yeah.
There's a whole ritual involved in getting it ready. The source calls it sorting and washing.
And it is not just a quick rinse under the tap. The source is very specific here.
No.
You need to wash it around 3 times.
3 times.
Now, why 3 times? It's not arbitrary. It's primarily to remove sand and dirt. Since these are often sun-dried on nets or mats outdoors, grit is a reality.
And sand is the absolute enemy of good meal. There is nothing worse than biting into something delicious and getting that gritty crunch.
No, it's the worst.
It ruins the immersion immediately.
Absolutely. But here is where it gets really interesting. And this is the first major aha moment of the deep dive for me. While you have to wash it to get the sand off, there is a massive structural warning attached to this step.
Yeah.
You're walking a tightrope here.
The structural warning, I like that part of the source. It was super clear. Do not soak in water for a long time.
Right. And this brings us back to the physics of the dried fish. Think about osmosis. You have this dehydrated fish cell. The moment you submerge it in water, it acts like a sponge.
Oh, yeah.
It wants to suck up that moisture immediately to reach equilibrium.
So if you leave it in the water too long, say treating it like you're rehydrating a dried mushroom or something.
It turns into complete mush. The source explicitly says it will turn very soft and break apart.
Wow.
If you soak it, you destroy the integrity of the fish before you even start cooking. You wash it to clean the surface, but you have to be quick. You need it to stay intact for the next phase.
Which is the frying phase. And honestly, this was the part of the deep dive where I really sat up and paid attention. Because I assumed, and I think most people would, that if you're making a stew, you just throw the fish into the liquid to cook gently. But no, we are doing a first cook.
If you skipped this and went straight to boiling, you'd have a very different and probably unappealing dish.
So let's walk through the mechanics of this. We are at the stove, medium-high flame. And the source mentions adding about 4 tablespoons of cooking oil. That feels like a specific amount, not deep frying, but generous.
It is a shallow fry. You need enough oil to conduct that heat rapidly into the crevices of the dried fish. You aren't just sautéing vegetables, you're trying to induce a rapid texture change on the protein surface.
And the goal here, according to the source, is to add a very nice crunch.
Texture contrast. That is what separates a decent home-cooked meal from something that feels professional. You are taking something that was dried, slightly rehydrated during the wash, so it's a little soft now, and you are blasting it with heat to create a crispy exterior.
The source gives us a timeline here, too. It's fast.
Very fast.
You fry for about 2 minutes, check it, and then maybe another 30 seconds.
And you are looking for visual cues. The source mentions watching for it to crispen up. You want that snap. If you skip this step or if you rush it, you are just going to have chewy, wet fish in a sauce.
Right.
By frying it first, you're creating a barrier. You are giving the fish a spine, an exoskeleton, so to speak.
And the sound. You can almost hear the sizzle just reading the transcript. So after about 2.5 minutes, the Kapenta is crispy. What happens next? Do we just dump the onions in right there?
No, and this is crucial. You remove the Kapenta.
Wow.
You take it out of the pan and set it aside in a small bowl. It needs a resting phase.
Why remove it? Why not just keep going? That seems inefficient.
It's actually about moisture management again. If you leave the fish in while you cook the onions and tomatoes, those vegetables are going to release a lot of water. If that water hits your hot, crispy fish immediately,
You just steam it.
it will steam. It will lose all that crispiness you just worked so hard to get. You have to separate the components to treat them correctly.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So now we have our crispy fish sitting on the sidelines looking all golden and delicious, and we are looking at an empty or mostly empty pan.
It is not just an empty pan, though. It is a seasoned pan.
Good point.
The source notes that we use the same pan. We might add just 1 tablespoon more of oil if needed, but we want to keep that flavored oil from the fish. This is resource efficiency, which is a hallmark of this cuisine, but it's also flavor layering. The base of our stew will have that underlying essence of the sea.
Okay, so now we are building the base,
Yeah.
the foundation, and it starts with the aromatics.
Onions. 1 medium onion, diced small. And again, the source doesn't just say cook the onions. There is a specific target we are aiming for.
A very nice golden brown color, and they need to be soft.
Golden brown means caramelization. We are developing sweetness here. This is important because the fish is salty and savory. If you just sweat the onions until they are translucent, you aren't getting that depth or that sweetness to counterbalance the protein.
Okay.
You need that browning to stand up to the strong flavor of the dried fish later.
And once the onions are golden, we introduce the tomatoes. 3 medium tomatoes. And I noticed a specific technique mentioned for cutting these.
Yes, cutting them in half, stripping them, and then dicing. It's a way to ensure uniform pieces that will break down evenly. And notice the timing. You only add the tomatoes after the onions are ready.
Right, because of the water content.
Because of the water and the acid.
Yeah.
If you add the tomatoes too early, the water they release will stop the onions from browning. You'd end up with boiled onions instead of caramelized ones.
Wow.
Cooking is so often just managing water content.
So the onions are brown, the tomatoes go in. Now we have to talk about the seasoning profile, because this is where the dish gets its personality. It's not a huge list of spices, but they seem very deliberate.
It is a very focused palette. First, curry powder.
Which adds that earthy, complex warmth.
Exactly. Curry powder is usually a blend of turmeric, coriander, cumin, fenugreek. It provides a savory baseline. Then, the source mentions a seasoning cube.
The seasoning cube. Now, I feel like we need to address this because in some circles, people turn their noses up at bouillon cubes. But the source treats it as a vital ingredient, stirred in until soft.
It is vital, and frankly, the stigma is a bit misplaced. Seasoning cubes are basically concentrated umami bombs. They are packed with savory depth, usually MSG or hydrolyzed vegetable protein, that binds everything together. In a quick stew like this, you don't have hours to simmer bones to get that richness. The cube provides that meaty backbone instantly.
And then salt. But wait, doesn't the seasoning cube have salt?
It does, and the source acknowledges that explicitly. She says seasoning cubes usually contain salt, but she adds a little bit more to fully season the Kapenta. It's about tasting and adjusting.
Sure.
You have to remember, this stew is going to be eaten with a very bland starch later. The sauce needs to be robust. It needs to be slightly punchier than you might expect if you were eating it straight.
And then the final kick, black pepper.
Yes. The source specifically says this is to provide a kick of spiciness. It's interesting because it's a different kind of heat than, say, a chili pepper.
Yeah.
Black pepper has that sharp, piney heat that hits you at the back of the throat. It cuts through the richness of the oil and the fishiness of the Kapenta.
So we have onions, tomatoes, curry powder, seasoning cubes, salt, and black pepper. And the source mentions using a spatula to stir all this together. But what if it gets too dry?
That is a common issue when frying aromatics. The source advises adding a splash of water if the pan dries out. You want the tomatoes to fully cook down. You are essentially making a tomato reduction or a thick sauce.
Right.
You don't want chunks of raw tomato. You want a cohesive, rich gravy.
Okay, so let's pause and look at where we are. On one side, we have the crispy fried Kapenta resting in a bowl. On the stove, we have this rich golden brown, spicy onion and tomato gravy.
This is the moment of synthesis. This is where the dish actually becomes Zambian Kapenta.
The reunion.
Exactly. You add that fried, crispy Kapenta back into the tomato sauce.
And you don't just stir it and serve it, right? There's another cooking phase here.
Yes, the simmer. The source says to add half a cup of water, reduce the flame to low, and let it go for around 5 minutes.
Now, wait a minute. We just spent a good 10 minutes explaining why we fried the fish to make it crispy. We talked about exoskeletons and texture. If we add water and simmer it for 5 minutes, aren't we just undoing all that work? Why fry it if we were just going to wet it again?
That is the paradox, isn't it? But here is where the chemistry gets really interesting. We aren't boiling it vigorously, we are simmering. And because we fried the fish first, we changed its structure permanently. We denatured the proteins on the outside and created that firm layer. So when it simmers now, it doesn't dissolve.
It holds its shape.
It holds its shape, but more importantly, it absorbs. The goal, as the source puts it, is to allow the nice flavors to be fully absorbed into the fish. If you hadn't fried it, it would just turn to mush. Because you fried it, it acts like a sponge that has some structural integrity. It pulls that curry and tomato flavor deep into the meat.
So you end up with what? A texture that is chewy?
You end up with a double texture. It's juicy and laden with sauce, but when you bite down, there's still resistance. There's still a meaty chew to it. It's not a dry crunch anymore, but it's definitely not a soft mush. It's the perfect middle ground.
That double texture, that is the secret. It's a very sophisticated technique for such a humble ingredient.
It really is. It turns a simple dried fish into a vehicle for complex sauce delivery.
So 5 minutes pass. The kitchen must smell incredible by now, savory, spicy, a little bit oceanic, but we aren't done yet.
Not yet.
There is a fresh finish.
The garnish. And in this recipe, the garnish isn't just decoration. It's a final flavor layer.
We are talking about red capsicum and coriander.
Red capsicum, or bell pepper, adds a burst of sweetness and a completely different texture, a fresh crunch compared to the cooked-down sauce.
Right.
The source notes you can use green capsicum too, but the red adds that vibrant pop of color against the dark sauce.
And the coriander. The source is pretty adamant about this one.
Not optional. That is a strong instruction.
It is. Not optional because of the specific flavor it adds.
Coriander, or cilantro, has those volatile oils, aldehydes specifically, that lift the whole dish. Stews can be heavy. Dried fish can be heavy. The coriander adds a top note of citrusy freshness that balances out the deep, savory, salty notes of the stew. It wakes the palate up.
So you stir that in right at the end.
Yes. You don't want to cook the life out of the coriander. Heat destroys those volatile compounds very quickly. You add it, maybe stir it in as you turn off the flame. You want that freshness to hit the diner's nose right as the plate is set down.
And speaking of setting the plate down, we have to talk about how this is served. You don't just eat a bowl of Kapenta on its own.
No. The source is very clear. The dish is best enjoyed over nshima.
Nshima. This is crucial context. For those who haven't had the pleasure or maybe know it as sadza or ugali in other parts of Africa, can we briefly touch on what that is?
Nshima is the staple food in Zambia. It is typically made from maize, flour, cornmeal, and water. It's cooked into a thick porridge, very stiff, almost like a dough.
Okay.
You can mold it with your hand. And the most important characteristic of nshima for our purposes is that it is very neutral in flavor.
And that neutrality seems so important here. It's not just filler.
It is essential. Think about the Kapenta we just made. It is incredibly bold, salty, fishy, spicy from the pepper, acidic from the tomatoes, savory from the onions. If you ate that with something else that was highly seasoned, like a pilaf or a seasoned potato dish, it might be overwhelming.
Too much.
But against the blank canvas of nshima, it's perfect.
It's the perfect vehicle.
Exactly. You use the nshima to scoop up the Kapenta. It balances the intensity. It dilutes the saltiness just enough to make it palatable.
It changes how you judge the recipe, doesn't it? If you tasted the Kapenta alone, you might think, whoa, that's a little too salty.
Right.
But the cook knows it's destined for the nshima.
Precisely. You cook for the complete bite, not just the component in the pot.
So looking back at this process, it really is a journey. We started with a pile of sandy, dried fish.
And through a series of very specific, deliberate steps washing without soaking, frying for crunch, building a separate flavor base, and then simmering for absorption, we transformed it into a complex delicacy.
It's amazing how much technique is hiding in plain sight in a recipe that claims minimal ingredients.
That is the beauty of traditional cooking. These recipes have evolved over generations to get the absolute maximum potential out of the ingredients available. They figured out through trial and error that frying the dried fish makes it better. They figured out that adding coriander at the end lifts the flavor. It's empirical science happening in the kitchen.
And it creates something that the host of the video describes as worth it and very delicious.
And honestly, looking at the finished result, that rich red sauce coating the fish, the flecks of green coriander, it looks incredibly appetizing.
So what does this all mean for us? I think the big takeaway here is about respecting your ingredients, no matter how humble they might seem.
Absolutely. It teaches us that dry doesn't mean lesser. It just means you have to treat it with a different set of rules. And if you follow those rules, specifically the rule about moisture management, you get rewarded with texture that you can't get from fresh fish.
That's a great point.
You couldn't make this dish with fresh fish, it would fall apart. The dried aspect is actually a feature, not a bug.
It's that double texture again. Frying for the crunch, simmering for the absorption. That's going to stick with me next time I'm in the kitchen.
It's a technique you can apply to other things, too. Think about tofu. People complain tofu is bland or mushy.
Sure.
But if you press it, which is removing moisture, fry it to create structure, and then simmer it in a sauce, it behaves exactly like the kapenta or mushrooms.
That's a great parallel. Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought. We talked about nshima being the neutral base for this spicy, bold dish.
Right.
It raises an interesting question about how we cook and how cuisines develop. Does the simplicity of the side dish actually force the cook to be more aggressive with the spices and textures of the main protein? If you knew you were serving this with a highly seasoned rice, would you subconsciously hold back on the curry powder or the black pepper?
That is a fascinating provocation. It suggests that the blandness of the staple food, whether it's rice in Asia, bread in Europe, or nshima in Zambia, is actually the driving force behind the creativity and boldness of the accompanying dishes.
Yeah.
It demands flavor intensity to make the meal complete.
It's a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
One can't exist without the other. Something to chew on.
Yeah.
And speaking of chewing, I hope this deep dive has inspired you to track down some kapenta or dagaa and try this recipe out.
It's definitely worth the effort. It's a window into a beautiful culinary culture. Just remember, do not soak the fish.
Do not soak the fish. That's the golden rule. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.